In August 2014, following a night out with friends, 23-year-old Fort Worth resident Christina Morris mysteriously disappeared. Later, CCTV footage helped identify the prime suspect as her one-time acquaintance, Enrique Arochi. The two were seen walking together and entering a parking lot in the early morning, which was the last time Morris was seen alive. Arochi was subsequently found guilty of kidnapping after authorities found solid evidence linking him to the disappearance, and the investigation to find Morris continued. Later in 2018, her skeletal remains were located by construction workers in a wooded area in Anna, Texas. Morris, a Plano native who used to live in Fort Worth, Texas, was back in her hometown for the Labor Day weekend at the time of her disappearance. She reportedly went for a night out with friends and was last seen alive near the shops at Legacy at 3:55 a.m. on August 30, 2014. Not long after, she was reported missing, and her car was found in a parking garage 3 days later. Christina Morris's then-boyfriend was the first suspect authorities believed was involved in her disappearance. He initially resisted providing them access to his phone and only handed it over after having deleted a few messages. He was, however, arrested and convicted on drug charges after he sold drugs to a federal agent working undercover on the evening of August 29th. Foster then gave the names of two individuals he claimed to have been out with the night Morris went missing as part of his alibi information to the police. Authorities eventually dismissed him as a suspect after searching through mobile phone data, toll road records, and speaking with witnesses. Arochi's 2010 Chevrolet Camaro was seen leaving the garage within a few minutes. However, the duo's cell phone data revealed that they were together for an hour later. Investigators also found Morris's DNA on the mat in Arochi's car trunk. He was arrested and charged with aggravated kidnapping. In September 2016, Arochi's case went to trial. After 17 hours of deliberation, a jury found him guilty of aggravated kidnapping in Christina Morris' 2014 disappearance, based on evidence provided by prosecutors. His defense tried to discredit the prosecution's case, claiming that the evidence was circumstantial and lacked evidence of what, when, where, or how. Enrique Arochi was sentenced to life in prison, and the search for Morris continued. Over 3 years after her disappearance, Morris's skeletal remains were unearthed by construction workers in a wooded area located in Collin County in Anna, Texas. Authorities had already conducted a thorough search for Morris in that particular area where the bones were eventually discovered. They were in an Anna neighborhood where new homes were being constructed. Accused kidnapper Enrique Arochi and Fort Worth resident Christina Morris, 23, were last seen entering a parking garage in 2014. According to security footage obtained during the initial investigation, Morris reportedly disappeared after the two were seen together in the early morning of August 30th. The missing case of the Fort Worth woman remained unsolved for 2 years, and it wasn't until September 2016 that a jury found the 26-year-old man guilty of aggravated kidnapping. According to them, Arochi's 2010 Chevrolet Camaro left the garage within 3 minutes. Cell tower data showed that Arochi and Morris's phones were still together an hour later. Additionally, prosecutors informed the jury that Arochi's car's trunk mat carried Morris's DNA. 3 days after Morris went missing, the police located her car in the parking garage. Enrique Arochi's defense disputed the DNA results and called a specialist to testify that the cell tower data might not be accurate. The defense alleged that Hunter Foster, Morris's then-boyfriend who was serving a 33-month federal prison term for conspiracy to distribute MDMA, might have been involved in her abduction. Arochi's defense objected to the state's constant emphasis on him and attempted to discredit the case against Arochi by claiming that it was circumstantial and that there was no evidence of what, when, where, or how. After 17 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict in the case against Enrique Arochi, and a court sentenced him to life in prison. Arochi even requested a new trial, but once Morris's skeletal remains were found in March 2018, the 5th District Court of Appeals in Texas in Dallas upheld the trial court's decision. He remains guilty of kidnapping, not murder. Orochi was never charged with murder in Christina's death, likely because he was already serving a lengthy life sentence. Moreover, it was impossible to determine the exact cause of her death due to the lack of skin or other body tissue. According to reports, Enrique Orochi is currently serving time at the maximum security French M. Robertson unit in Abilene, Texas, and does not have a scheduled release date. But as per the Department of Corrections records, he will most likely become eligible for parole on December 12, 2044. Over 3 years after her disappearance, Morris's skeletal remains were unearthed by construction workers in a wooded area located in Collin County in Anna, Texas. Authorities had already conducted a thorough search for Morris in that particular area where the bones were eventually discovered. They were in an Anna neighborhood where new homes were being constructed. For 3 years, the members of Team Christina met at Allen High School on most Saturday mornings. The December frost on the ground doesn't stop them on the day I finally joined them. The Help Find Christina Facebook page suggested that volunteers bring a golf club or walking stick with them. Though I've borrowed one of my dad's drivers for the day, it turns out golf clubs are too short to be of much help. Luckily, the team always brought plenty of spare sticks and sawed-off broom handles to spare for newcomers. Most of the regular searchers have their favorites, which they claim quickly. They also have hiking boots with thick rubber soles or steel tips. Back in 2014, hundreds of people came together under the banner of Team Christina. They turned out like an army, tramping through undeveloped lots in long lines. As weeks, then months, and finally years passed, the group shrank until 10 was considered a good turnout. But the core of Team Christina has always been strong. They all have their own reasons for meeting at Allen High School early on Saturday mornings. Ask any of them, and they'd say that they believed wholeheartedly that one day they would find Christina Morris. They'd add that Mark himself, most days, says that he knows Christina is gone. But sometimes he hopes she's alive, somewhere in Mexico, maybe, living some other kind of a life. Usually, however, he'll say that they're out in the wilds of North Texas looking for his daughter's body. On December 9, 2017, the search numbers are few enough that we can all squeeze into 2 trucks, one with Christina's face and description on the back window. That's Mark Morris's car. On the 30 minutes drive, still with my golf club between my feet, I tell them I'd like to write an article about Team Christina in honor of the upcoming 4-year anniversary of Christina's disappearance. They agree. I'm not the first journalist to make this request. In fact, I think I was one of the last. The winter searches are primarily through fields of dead yellow grass, shin-high and stiff with the cold. We rake it aside in clumps, looking for a silver ring with a love knot, a black hat, an iPhone, a patterned skirt. As we poke through, people share personal tidbits, tossing familiar small talk into the air. Whenever I think about sleeping in on a Saturday, I picture Mark out here, looking for his daughter alone, one team member explains. And I know I have to come back. After combing over the search area, the group habitually retired to Crow's Country Cafe, an old-fashioned diner in the heart of Anna. We crowd around a long table, shedding jackets, winded and sweating. Mark recommends the fried pickles and the chicken strips. It's very close to Christmas and a parade marches outside the window down the quaint main road. Collin County felt the blow when Christina Morris disappeared. In 2014, the Shops at Legacy area was one of the most popular places in Plano. It was an easily walkable microcosm of city life, in the center of a suburb that prided itself on its safety. At the time, it floored me. I had never heard of anything like it happening. In high school, my friend's dry mantra was, "Nothing ever happens in Plano." Overnight, Christina Morris became everyone's daughter, trapped in every parent's worst nightmare. Among them was Enrique Orochi. Christina Morris didn't know him, though he'd attended the same high school. In fact, Petrosky had only met him that summer. Initially, most of the group were parked near her apartment, but since it was time-restricted, they later moved to the garage by Henry's Tavern, the first bar they visited that night. Christina Morris parked her Toyota Celica facing Enrique's car, a curvy black Camaro. Around 11, they arrived at Henry's Tavern, where they hung out for a while. Then they crossed Legacy Drive to go to Scruffy Duffy's. They stayed until last call, and eventually, most of them returned to Petrosky's apartment. At 2:12 a.m., Christina texted her boyfriend, Hunter Foster, asking him to come pick her up. Earlier, she had told him she couldn't find her car keys. A little after 2:30, she recovered them, but again asked Hunter to come get her. Christina Morris considered sleeping over instead of embarking on the hour-long drive back to Fort Worth, but decided she wanted to see Hunter. They'd been fighting that night. It was a long, fuzzy evening, only pieced together later by witness testimony. As 4 a.m. approached, Christina decided to drive home. She sent her last few texts at 3:48 a.m., indicating that her phone was dying. By that point, Christina Morris had already left Petrosky's and was walking back to the garage where she'd parked her car. Christina Morris was afraid of the dark. Even at her parents' house, she wouldn't go as far as the mailbox alone at night. She wouldn't have wanted to walk that far alone. So, at first, it must have comforted her that Enrique Arochi was with her. When Christina Morris was reported missing 2 days later, Enrique told detectives that he and Christina hadn't spoken on that walk. To this day, no one but him knows what words they exchanged. One of the others from the party, Stephen Nickerson, called Christina Morris about 10 minutes after she and Enrique left the apartment to see if she'd made it safely to her car. Christina told him that they were almost there, and she'd text him when she reached her car. 5 minutes later, Nickerson texted her. She didn't reply. He called her but only got her voicemail. At 3:55 a.m., Christina Morris and Enrique Arochi entered the parking garage together. At 3:58 a.m., Enrique's car left, ghosting out into the night. At 4:08 a.m., a green Kia Soul was seen circling the garage, similar to an Uber driver looking for a passenger. But no one had any record of picking Christina up. Though she could have left on foot, it would have been almost impossible for her to have avoided the security cameras. The police were sure of one fact. No one saw Christina leave the parking garage. Her car never moved. Enrique, a manager at an Allen Sprint store, was supposed to report at work by 8 a.m. First, however, he stopped at a car wash and filled his tank. On the surveillance tapes, Enrique was shown peering inside his car and wiping off the passenger side with a rag. Next, he opened the trunk and scrubbed all over the inside of it with a gas station squeegee. He arrived at work 3 hours late. Later, his co-worker testified that he was shaken up and scattered all day. He had scratches, bloodied knuckles, and a strange mark, perhaps a bite. He said he'd been in a fight the night before. When Christina's family reported her missing on September 2, they expected she'd be found and that everything was okay, that their daughter would return with a wild story to tell about Labor Day weekend. Instead, Plano police located her silver Toyota, still parked in the garage behind Henry's Tavern. There was no sign of foul play. They collected a single can of Dr. Pepper to extract Christina's DNA and called Mark to allow him to drive his child's car home, with no answers and no sign of Christina. However, toll records show that he didn't take 75, but Sam Rayburn Tollway, which slants north toward Anna on its way to Allen. Furthermore, a detective who reviewed the surveillance tapes from that night came across a ghostly image of two people walking into the Henry's Tavern garage together, a small woman and a man. When Enrique was called back for a second interview, detectives showed him a screenshot of the surveillance tape. He confirmed that it was indeed Christina and him. Enrique quickly changed his story. He claimed they entered the garage together, but said he walked through the garage to Blue Martini. Christina had been loudly arguing on the phone with someone the whole way over. He'd barely exchanged a word with her. However, at 3:58 a.m., his car didn't exit from the garage by Blue Martini, but from the same garage he'd entered with Christina not 5 minutes after they walked inside. So, Enrique changed his story again, admitting that they'd all parked near each other earlier in the night and that he'd let her borrow his phone to text and call her boyfriend, Foster. Cell phone records confirm it, though Hunter never replied to her. There were no signs of a struggle in the parking garage, but of all the ways Christina could have left it, the most likely scenario is that she left in Enrique's car. There are two prevailing theories that would later be described in the state's case against Enrique. The trunk theory reasoned that Enrique could have advanced on Christina, still sore from his failed encounter with Sabrina Boss. For some reason, perhaps anger, drunkenness, impulsivity, he forced her into the trunk of his car and drove off. The morning after Christina's disappearance, Enrique's beloved car had a sizable dent in the fender. He said that he'd injured himself while changing a tire and reacted by punching the car. Perhaps it was dented in a struggle to subdue Christina, who would have never gotten into his trunk of her own accord. Or, police theorized, maybe he offered to drive her back to Fort Worth and she accepted, which was why he was careful to clean the passenger side. However, when he got on Highway 121, Christina realized that she wasn't being taken where she wanted to go. Maybe in the midst of a struggle, Enrique made a fatal mistake. He might have thought of Anna, Texas, and the peaceful, wide-open spaces where anyone could be lost. Maybe he just drove, too shocked to know where his car was taking him. What happened between the hours of 4 and 10 in the morning when he scrubbed his car down at a gas station is anyone's guess. On September 26th, the police searched Enrique's Camaro. It had been recently cleaned again. Bits of vegetation were wedged around the wheelbase and the undercarriage had been damaged. A botanist identified the vegetation and concluded it came from a wet or damp area, like a drainage ditch on the side of a country road or a shaded area. But when CSI technicians sprayed the inside of the trunk, they found the most damning evidence in the case, a DNA sample equivalent to 6 drops of blood. It was swabbed from the rubber weather stripping at the front of the trunk and from 2 places on the mat. It was Christina's, either her blood or saliva. Her DNA was in that trunk. However it got there or why, Christina, who was claustrophobic and afraid of the dark, would have never wanted to be there. On December 13, 2014, the Plano police arrested Enrique at his home on a single charge: the aggravated kidnapping of Christina with intent to inflict bodily injury, violation or sexual abuse, or otherwise terrorize her. The trial that unfolded in June 2016 was the first time most people saw all of the evidence for and against Enrique, and the case the prosecution had built around Christina's absence, rather than any lead on a body. Meanwhile, every Saturday, hundreds of people joined Christina's family with dogs and drones to search for her, wearing purple in her honor. Hunter was then, and remains today, one of the many questions of the case, simply because of how rarely he appears. He wasn't present when Christina vanished. He didn't text her back that night. He has seldom, if ever, spoken to the press about his missing girlfriend. Still, he had an alibi. The defense also brought up an uncorroborated tip from an inmate in the Cleburne County Jail, who claimed Christina was murdered because she witnessed a stabbing by the Aryan Brotherhood. Enrique had one other felony assault charge, brought while he was a known suspect in Christina's disappearance because of evidence discovered during the investigation. In 2012, he had engaged in a 6-month relationship with a 16-year-old girl while he was 22. The girl, who was never identified, told police that Orochi choked and hit her during sex. He'd also lied to his current girlfriend about his whereabouts on the night Christina vanished, telling her around 10 p.m. that he was going to bed, when really he went to the shops at Legacy to party. To get a conviction, every detail had to be brought forward. Any strange behavior of Enrique's was dissected for evidence that he was capable of such a disturbing crime. According to this investigator, the words inside were a written request, probably to a deity of some kind, and the oils were meant to invoke a blessing. Placing it in a shoe meant domination over others. Eventually, the jar was ruled as inadmissible, but one full day of the trial was taken up by the whiff of witchcraft. Enrique said that his character had been slandered. The olive jar made him an outsider, or worse, a foreigner with strange, superstitious habits. The lies he'd told the police made his conscience a guilty one. A phone, which he stole from the Sprint store where he worked, made him untrustworthy. Enrique's Latina mother, who spoke Spanish to the press as she protested that her son was the victim of a tar and feather job, as reported by Star Local Media, didn't convince a public that was and is with Christina. These final details completed the prosecution's work. If Enrique had ever been innocent, he wasn't anymore. He has been serving a life sentence ever since. The felony assault charge for his underage ex-girlfriend was dismissed in the interest of justice after he was handed a life sentence for Christina's kidnapping, since he was already serving so much time. The prosecution's answering brief rebutted. His story changed repeatedly as he talked to friends and police, and it contradicted physical evidence and surveillance videos. Prosecutors wrote, Christina's DNA was found in his trunk, where she never would have entered voluntarily. Furthermore, they continued, they had found nothing to suggest another suspect besides Enrique. Not a footprint, not a fingerprint, not a drop of blood. In Anna, Team Christina became a common sight for local residents, combing through thickets of trees and standing by the sides of roads. Every Saturday, they considered where a car might have reasonably pulled into the grass at 4 a.m. on a Labor Day weekend. They wondered whether a young woman in the trunk might have felt the jolt of rough terrain as the wheels pulled to a stop, or if, perhaps, her suffering had already ended and she had felt nothing at all. It's hard to search for clues without thinking of her and of a young man whose life had taken a terrifying twist, racing the sun. If Enrique took Christina, it was done out of anger, frustration, and drunken courage. They should have entered the garage and arrived at their cars, which were parked so close the prosecution noted that they were facing each other, and there, they should have parted ways. But in the end, though Enrique made it to his car, Christina didn't make it to hers. Almost immediately, everyone, from the Anna police to the Collin County Sheriff's Office to the Plano police, was called. Anna had been so closely associated with Christina for so long that it hardly seemed possible that it would be anyone else. It's a miracle that the crew hadn't disturbed her or inadvertently buried her. Her DNA and dental records were on file, so it only took a few hours for the medical examiner's office to make a positive identification. Her impact spreads beyond Texas. In their quest for justice, her family brought her story to the national stage. Her mother appeared on Dr. Phil. People magazine covered the discovery of her body. Crime Watch Daily and Dateline featured her as recently as this year.